Let's take a look at how to create a hover scale zoom interaction on a card where the card scales down at the same time that the image within it zooms in just a little bit. It looks something like this. And you can see as we move across it, it's kind of a subtle on the zoom in on the image, but just enough to really kind of make it pop. So let's jump in and take a look at how to do this. I'm going to, first of all, come over to another page here where we are starting fresh. We have our 3 cards here. And the structure of our card is we have our main card, which is the name of the class. And within that card, we have a card image, which is also a class name. And we have our card content wrapper with a header and a paragraph within it. So that's our structure. Let's go ahead and select our 3rd card here. And let's get into making our interaction. But before we do that, each card is set up as a div. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that the overflow is set to hidden. As we change the size of the card, I want to make sure that nothing comes outside the boundaries of the card. So we want it all to be neatly contained within the card. All right, that's the first thing. The second thing, we want to do the same thing with the card image. Make sure that that is also set to overflow hidden, which we are here. That's good. Then down here on the card content wrapper, what I want to make sure here on the card content wrapper happens is that as that image zooms in during the hover, I want to maintain the size of the card content wrapper. And there are 2 things that I'm going to do to make sure that happens. First, I am going to set the position to relative. And second, I'm going to come down here to the background color and make sure that's set to our background color. So we have our little variable here. We're going to set it to our background color, which is a black. And the reason for that is that as the image zooms in, as we hover over the card, we want that to kind of essentially fall behind the card content wrapper. So we want to maintain the size of that card content wrapper as we're zooming in that image. Okay, now we're all set up. Let's go ahead and work on our interaction. So again, I'm going to go ahead and select the main card here. I'm going to come over to our interactions panel. At the bottom here, we want to make sure that we change our version over to interactions with GSAP. That's our new interactions engine that we're going to be using here today. Now, once we've actually set our version to interactions with GSAP, we're going to come up and create our interaction. So I'm going to scroll up here and we'll click on hover because we're creating a hover interaction. We'll go ahead and give this a name and we'll call this our card hover interaction. All good there. And by default, as we've created this interaction, because we already told it was going to be a hover interaction, it created our first trigger. So we have a new interaction, and within that interaction, we have our first trigger. Let's click on our trigger here and take a look at some of the hover settings here. We are targeting a class called main card because we had the main card selected on our canvas. So that's what we're targeting. And we want to apply this to all matching elements. In other words, anything that is a class main card, we want to apply this trigger to. Now, we want to trigger when the mouse enters the element, as soon as the mouse comes over the card. And we want it to do it each time the mouse enters the card. So we want it to do it more than just once. We want it to do it every time the mouse goes over the card. And then finally, we have this control setting here. I want to change this one to play. Let me explain why. So as a user is moving their mouse over these cards, and perhaps they're doing it fairly quickly, we want the experience to be that as soon as the mouse moves over the card, we want to change the animation from wherever it's at. So if they're doing it very quickly, it may not be done with the animation, and we want to play from that point, as opposed to resetting the overall action that we're going to define here in just a moment and play from where it's at. So that's why we change it to play. Okay. With that, we're ready to make our second trigger. Now, obviously, when the mouse goes over one of these cards, we want to trigger these actions that we're going to define. But also, we want it to do the inverse. As the mouse leaves, we want it to also reverse those actions. So we're going to create a new trigger. Click plus. We'll choose hover, and we'll click into that one. Now, this one we need to change up a little bit. Now, we still want the class, main card class, to be affected. But here, we want to change it to mouse leave. So when the mouse leaves the card, and we want to leave it at each mouse leave. So every time the mouse leaves the card, we're going to trigger here. In this case, we're going to do something different, though. We want to reverse our actions that we're about to define here. And so that's how we set up the reverse. So we have 2 triggers, one for when the mouse hovers over the card and one for when the mouse leaves the card. Now we're ready to create our actions. This is where the fun gets going here. So we're going to click on Scale In, and you'll notice something happens here. A few things. First of all, what happened to our canvas? Where did our cards go? Let me just explain that really quickly. When we get down to scale here, it defaults to 0, but I can change that to 1, which is the default size. So now you can see our cards are back. Now let me go back up to the top and explain how all this works. Let's give first of all, our action a name, and we'll call this card. We'll just call it card shrink. And we want to go ahead and leave the target the same as the trigger. Because we're affecting the entire card here, we'll just leave it the same as the trigger. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit more detail in a moment here. We want this to be fairly responsive, so I'm going to change the duration to 0.15 to happen fairly quickly. And then we're going to change our ease here just to make it a smoother experience. So we'll click on this and we'll change that to power 1 in and out. So it's going to smooth both the interaction as it starts, or this action as it starts and as it finishes. And on scale here, we're going to go from 1 down to smaller, so 0.95, let's say. We can always tune this later. So we'll go ahead and pop back out now. There's our first action. And let's just go into preview mode and take a look at what that looks like so far. So as I hover over the card shrinks. As I leave the card comes back to its normal size. So it's working exactly like we wanted it to. That's fantastic. Now that we've scaled the card, we're ready to make our next action, which is actually zooming in the image. So I'm going to go up here to Actions. We'll click plus and choose another scale in. Everything disappears again, and we'll get that sorted out. But the first thing we need to do, let's give it a name. We'll call this Zoom Image. And this one's a little bit different because instead of affecting the entire card, which we did for the first one where we shrunk the card down a little bit, now I want to target just the image itself. So we need to change our target just a little bit. So I'm going to click on this. We're changing it from trigger element to class. And now I'm going to select the class, which in this case is our card image. Now we'll click out. A couple of things here. The image disappeared. Why? Well, we'll address that in just a minute. But first, I need to line these up. You'll notice down here in the timeline that the zoom image comes after the scale card. I want those to happen at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this and just drag it to the left. And we can also change the duration so that they match. So I'll just shrink that down so that the scale card, where we're actually shrinking down the card, and the zooming of the image happen at the same time. You can also do that up here and start. If I just wanted to change that, it was at 0.15. I could just change it to 0 here and it would achieve the same thing. All right, just like before, we want our ease. We're going to power 1 in and out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to scale. Now the image isn't here. Here's how we fix that. We change the from to 1. And as soon as we do that, our image comes back. And we're going to scale this up to 1.15. Let's go ahead and do that. And there we have it. Let's go to preview mode and see how it's working now. So now as we hover, we get that effect that we were looking for. I want to cover just kind of the basic structure here so that this makes more sense. As you go to build other interactions, you'll have a good understanding. So we created an interaction. We call it our card hover interaction. We created 2 triggers, one for when the mouse hovers over the card and another one for when the mouse leaves the card. So we have an interaction with 2 triggers in it. And then we set up 2 actions. Those 2 actions are to shrink the card and to zoom in the image. And what happens is because we set up our triggers, one is going to run those animations when we hover on the card, and the other is going to reverse those actions when the mouse leaves the card. So that's how the overall structure of an interaction is set up here. There's one other thing that's super powerful here. You'll notice at the start of the video, we actually showed you another page that already had these interactions on them, assigned to the same classes. But when we went to this home page, those interactions weren't there. And you actually have the power to define where these interactions that we just set up run, which pages they run on. So you assign, of course, an interaction to a class. But what if you have some elements with that same class or those other classes on other pages? Normally, they would pick up those interactions as well, but you can actually assign where it's going to run. So for example, in this case, we can run them just on the home page. We could choose all pages, or we could actually even multi-select and play them on some pages, but not on other pages. So super powerful there. So that's how to set up a basic interaction that's powered by GSAP in Webflow. Get out there and make some great interactions, and we'll talk to you again soon.